Before we begin, I want to give you a clear and serious warning. The story you're about to hear contains graphic descriptions of extreme violence. This content may be deeply disturbing or emotionally triggering for some viewers. I personally had to stop recording more than once and take breaks because of how intense and unsettling the details are. If you're sensitive to discussions of violent crime, especially involving families and young victims, please proceed with caution or consider skipping this episode altogether. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. On a warm Sunday evening, June 9, 1912, the Moore family of Villisca, Iowa, walked home from a cheerful church event, unaware of the horror awaiting them. Josiah B. Moore, 43, and his wife Sarah, 39, were well-liked townsfolk raising 4 children: 11-year-old Herman, 10-year-old Mary Catherine, 7-year-old Arthur, and 5-year-old Paul. That night, 2 of Mary's young friends, Lena, 12, and Ina Stillinger, 8, were invited for a sleepover after the Children's Day program at church. The 6 Moore children and their guests spent the late evening playing and chatting in the modest white frame house, finally retiring to bed in high spirits. Sometime after midnight, their joy turned to unspeakable tragedy. An intruder, or perhaps more than one, silently entered the unlocked house and crept past the rooms where the children slept. The killer first crept into the master bedroom and brought down an axe on Josiah Moore as he slept, crushing his skull with such force that it left a gouge in the plaster ceiling. Sarah had barely a moment to wake. She, too, was struck and killed before she could scream. The murderer then stalked from room to room in the dark, methodically bludgeoning each of the Moore children in their beds. Finally, the killer descended the stairs to the guest room where the Stillinger sisters slept, ending the young girls' lives with brutal blows of the bloodied axe. In a matter of minutes, 8 victims, 2 adults and 6 children had been savagely slain in their own home. The scene the murderer left behind was a tableau of carnage and puzzling ritual. The victims' skulls had been shattered by repeated blows, and Josiah's face was so badly mutilated that his eyes were destroyed. Investigators later determined Josiah alone had been struck around 30 times, far more than any other victim. In a final grotesque act, the killer went back and delivered additional blows to each victim, as if in a frenzy or grim thoroughness, even overturning a shoe that had filled with blood during the initial assault. Oddly, all the victims' faces had been covered with bedclothes after the murders, and every mirror in the house was draped with cloths or blankets. As dawn approached, the murderer quietly vanished into the night, leaving behind an axe propped against a wall and a house of silence and death. Early the next morning, on June 10th, neighbor Mary Peckham noticed the usually early-rising Moore household was unnaturally still. The yard's chickens had not been fed, and no one had stepped outside to begin the day's chores. Concerned, Peckham knocked on the door repeatedly. No answer. She tried the door and found it locked from the inside. Sensing something was wrong, Peckham let the chickens out herself and called Josiah's brother, Ross Moore, for help. Ross arrived and used his spare key to cautiously open the front door while Peckham waited on the porch, fearful of what they might find. Stepping into the parlor, Ross headed for the downstairs guest bedroom, and there on the bed, he found the bloodied bodies of Lena and Ina Stillinger. He staggered back and shouted for Peckham to fetch Villisca's marshal, Hank Horton. Marshal Horton's subsequent search of the house confirmed the worst. Room by room, he discovered the entire Moore family slain in their beds, the rooms spattered with blood. In the upstairs bedrooms, Josiah and Sarah Moore and their 4 children lay dead, their heads crushed by the blunt side of Josiah's own axe, which had been left at the scene. Downstairs in the guest room were the 2 Stillinger girls, also brutally bludgeoned beyond recognition. Investigators later estimated the murders took place sometime between midnight and 5 a.m., while the victims were sleeping. Chillingly, evidence suggested the killer may have hidden in the attic, silently smoking cigarettes and waiting for the household to fall asleep. 2 spent cigarette butts were found in the attic, indicating someone lurked there in the shadows before emerging to commit the massacre. There were disturbing hints that at least one victim awoke before the end. 12-year-old Lena Stillinger's body was found posed oddly, lying crosswise at the foot of the bed with her nightgown pushed up. She had a defensive wound on her arm, suggesting she woke and tried in vain to fend off the attack. Investigators noted her underwear had been removed and thrown aside, and her young body was repositioned in a lewd way. This led to early speculation that the killer had a sexual motive or assaulted Lena, though modern forensics found no definitive evidence of sexual abuse. It is a haunting detail, the idea that the murderer's madness may have included a twisted fixation on the eldest girl. Other peculiar clues baffled the authorities. A kerosene lamp was found in Josiah and Sarah's bedroom with its chimney removed and wick turned down low to cast only a faint glow. Another lamp was left at the foot of the Stillinger girl's bed downstairs. The killer had apparently taken a 4-pound slab of bacon from the Moore's icebox and placed it on the floor next to the axe, along with a gory bowl of water, presumably used by the killer to wash their hands. These bizarre touches, the covered mirrors, the lamps, the untouched food and bloody wash bowl, gave the crime scene an almost ritualistic aura. Villisca's residents and lawmen struggled to imagine what kind of person could commit such an atrocity and then calmly perform these strange domestic acts in the bloody aftermath. News of the massacre spread quickly and shock gave way to morbid curiosity. In 1912, rural Villisca had no police force equipped to secure a crime scene, and the concept of forensic preservation was in its infancy. By 8:30 a.m. that morning, word of the murders had reached most of the town's 2,000 residents, via an operator-assisted telephone call that rang through every household. Dozens of horrified Villiscans rushed to the Moore home, and despite the sheriff's efforts, the crime scene soon descended into chaos. Scores of townspeople and onlookers traipsed through the house, trampling evidence and even taking gruesome souvenirs. In the parlor, one ghoulish visitor furtively pocketed a fragment of Josiah Moore's shattered skull, and others handled the murder weapon so much that the blade was smeared with countless unknown fingerprints. The county coroner arrived to find the house overrun with people, contaminating nearly everything. It took until noon for the National Guard to finally clear and cordon off the property. By then, any hope of gathering untouched forensic clues was long gone. Villisca's armory was converted to a temporary morgue where the 8 victims were laid out, as townsfolk wept and reporters from across Iowa began to converge on the once idyllic pretty place, as Villisca's name roughly meant in the local native language. The immediate aftermath was a scene of grief and bewilderment. Who could have done this? In a tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone, the idea of a murderer in their midst was terrifying. Doors that were habitually left unlocked at night were now bolted tight. Neighbors eyed each other with suspicion, while parents clutched their remaining children a little closer. Over the coming days, thousands attended the victims' funeral services. A line of wagons reportedly stretched for miles from the church to the cemetery, and the little town of Villisca plunged into mourning. Yet even as the Moores and Stillinger sisters were laid to rest, the hunt for the killer had only just begun. In the absence of an obvious culprit, a whirl of rumors and theories began to spiral, casting long shadows of suspicion for years to come. Despite a lengthy investigation and a slew of suspects, the Villisca Axe murders were never definitively solved. In the wake of the crime, authorities and private detectives alike pursued leads that ranged from credible to bizarre. Over time, a rogues gallery of possible perpetrators emerged: itinerant preachers, deranged drifters, jealous rivals, even the specter of a serial killer riding the rails. Each theory had its own dark logic and intrigue, yet none could crack the case. One early focus of suspicion was Reverend Lynn George Jacqueline Kelly, an English-born traveling minister who had been in Villisca on the night of the murders. Reverend Kelly was a peculiar figure, a diminutive, eccentric man who had a reputation for odd behavior and mental instability. He'd suffered a mental breakdown in adolescence, and as an adult he exhibited unsettling fixations, including accusations of peeping and asking young women to pose nude for him. Kelly happened to attend the same Children's Day church program as the Moore family on June 9, 1912, where he even served as a guest teacher. In the early morning hours right after the massacre, between 5 o'clock and 5:30 a.m., Kelly abruptly boarded a train out of Villisca, leaving town before the bodies were discovered. This hasty departure aroused suspicion in hindsight. What truly cemented Reverend Kelly as a suspect, however, were his own words. In the weeks following the murders, Kelly became bizarrely fascinated with the case. He wrote voluminous letters to police, investigators, and even the victims' families, obsessively asking about details of the crime. At one point, he claimed to have heard sounds or witnessed the murders from afar, offering up disturbingly vivid details. Given his fragile mental state, authorities wondered, were these details the product of a guilty conscience? or just the morbid imaginings of an unwell mind. Years later, in 1917, Reverend Kelly confessed to the Villisca Axe murders while in police custody. He told prosecutors that God had whispered to him to slay utterly the Moore family, and that he had obeyed the divine command. This dramatic confession made headlines, yet it did not bring closure. Kelly soon recanted his story, and many doubted its veracity. His confession had come after hours of intense interrogation and possibly coercion, and it fit a pattern of erratic behavior rather than a clear motive. In fact, Kelly was known to have a weak grasp on reality at times, leaving open the possibility that his confession was a delusion or a bid for attention. Reverend Kelly was ultimately charged and brought to trial for the Villisca murders. The first trial ended with a hung jury, unable to reach a unanimous verdict. A second trial in late 1917 resulted in Kelly's acquittal, as jurors concluded that there was not enough solid evidence to convict him despite his confession. The minister's own inconsistent mind proved as much an obstacle as any reasonable doubt. The jury simply did not believe Kelly's story, especially given that key details of the crime scene did not perfectly match his claims. Reverend Kelly walked free, and for the rest of his life, he died in 1951. He remained a footnote, an eerie character forever linked to Villisca's tragedy, but officially unpunished. His flirtation with infamy did leave one enduring legacy. The notion that a crazed preacher might be the axe murderer became one of Villisca's most persistent legends. To this day, many still wonder if the little minister with big demons could have been the one behind the slaughter. Another leading theory pointed to a powerful figure much closer to home, Iowa State Senator Frank F. Jones, one of Villisca's most prominent residents. Frank Jones was not just a politician. He was also a successful businessman and, notably, the former employer of Josiah Moore. For years, Josiah had worked as a top salesman in Jones's farm equipment dealership. In 1907, however, Josiah Moore quit Jones's company and opened his own implement store, reportedly taking with him a valuable John Deere franchise and many of Jones's best customers. This professional betrayal bred bad blood between the two men. Town gossip whispered that Senator Jones seethed over Josiah's success and felt humiliated by the loss of business. There were even salacious rumors that Josiah had carried on an affair with Jones's daughter-in-law, a rumor for which no evidence ever emerged, but which nevertheless inflamed the imagination of locals looking for motives. In the eyes of some Villiscans, the Moore murders looked exactly like a revenge slaying ordered by Frank Jones. The theory that gained traction was that Senator Jones, driven by hatred or wounded pride, hired someone to wipe out the Moore family in cold blood. But who would carry out such a heinous task? Suspicion soon fell on a man named William Blackie Mansfield, an ex-convict and known cocaine addict with a violent reputation. Mansfield had once worked as a hired hand and was rumored to do dirty jobs for money. Detective James Newton Wilkerson, a private investigator from the Burns Detective Agency, became the chief proponent of the Jones-Mansfield theory. Wilkerson doggedly pursued Mansfield, portraying him as a serial axe murderer for hire. According to contemporary reports collected by Wilkerson, William Mansfield was not only the fiend behind Villisca, but also the perpetrator of a string of eerily similar family axe murders across several states. Wilkerson pointed out striking parallels between the Villisca killings and other unsolved axe murder cases. Just 9 months before the Moore family was slain, an entire family in Colorado Springs was murdered in their beds with an axe. Weeks after that, 2 more families were butchered in Kansas, all in their homes at night, with their faces covered by cloth and the mirrors or windows shrouded. In each case, the killer had used the blunt side of an axe found at the victim's house, left a kerosene lamp burning low, and carefully covered the victims' faces and any reflective surfaces before slipping away. The similarities were too peculiar to ignore. At the Moore home, aprons and skirts had been hung over windows. In Colorado Springs, sheets were hung to cover windows in the same manner. In Villisca, a bloody basin was found in the kitchen. In other cases, a basin of water was likewise discovered, as if the killer washed up afterwards. Wilkerson argued that these patterns were the signature of one man, William Mansfield, and that Mansfield had been employed by Senator Frank Jones to take out Josiah Moore with the rest of the family and overnight guests as collateral victims. In 1916, Wilkerson's relentless campaigning paid off to some degree. A grand jury was convened to investigate Frank Jones's possible involvement. and Mansfield was actually arrested and charged with the Villisca murders. It was a sensational development. However, the case against Mansfield quickly fell apart. Mansfield produced payroll records proving he had been working several hundred miles away in Illinois on the night of the Villisca killings. His alibi was rock solid, supported by time cards and employer testimony. With little beyond circumstantial evidence in Wilkerson's theory, Mansfield was released, and the grand jury disbanded without any indictment against Senator Jones due to lack of proof. The ambitious detective's crusade did have one coda. Mansfield later sued Wilkerson for slander and defamation. He won the suit and was awarded $2,000, a public exoneration and humiliation for the detective who had accused him. Beyond Kelly, Jones, and Mansfield, a number of other suspects and theories swirled around this case, reflecting just how perplexing and wide-reaching the mystery became. Every transient laborer or stranger who passed through Villisca around that time fell under suspicion. One such man, Andy Sawyer, was a transient seen acting strangely in the days after the murders, obsessively discussing the crime and even sleeping with an axe at his side. Though he was interrogated, Sawyer had been working in another town on the night of the murders and was never charged. If Villisca's killer wasn't an outsider, could he have been someone with a personal grudge? Investigators even looked at Samuel Moyer, Josiah Moore's own brother-in-law. Moyer was known to have quarreled with Josiah. In fact, at the coroner's inquest, it came out that Sam Moyer had often threatened to kill Josiah in the past. This made him an early suspect, but Moyer too had an alibi that cleared him, and authorities ultimately concluded he had no involvement. As the local leads petered out, some detectives began to suspect that the Villisca atrocity was not an isolated act at all, but part of a cross-country killing spree. The early 1910s were a turbulent time in America, and sensational crimes were not easily investigated across state lines. Indeed, between 1911 and 1912, dozens of eerily similar axe murders of entire families had occurred in Midwestern and Southern states, many of them near railroad lines. One suspect who fits this mold was Henry Lee Moore, no relation to Josiah Moore's family. Henry Moore was a suspected serial killer who, astonishingly, was convicted of murdering his own mother and grandmother with an axe in the months after the Villisca killings. He had been released from prison not long before June 1912 and was drifting around the Midwest. Investigators noted that the vicious murder of Henry's relatives and the Villisca crime shared some striking similarities in method. Though never formally charged in the Villisca case, Henry Lee Moore became a person of interest when authorities pondered whether an axe-murdering Henry Moore might have been responsible for the Villisca slayings and other similar crimes in the region. However, like other leads, nothing concrete tied Henry to Villisca beyond the coincidental timing and modus operandi. In recent years, the serial killer theory gained a compelling new champion. In 2017, renowned crime writer Bill James, working with his daughter, Rachel McCarthy James, published an exhaustive investigative book, The Man from the Train, which seeks to connect the dots between dozens of early 20th century family murders. The Jameses conclude that a single shadowy figure, whom they identify as Paul Mueller, or Miller, was likely behind many of these cases, including the Villisca Axe murders. Mueller was a German immigrant and a suspect in an unsolved 1897 massacre of a family in Massachusetts, after which he vanished. According to The Man from the Train, Mueller then spent years riding America's rails, slipping into small towns to slaughter entire households, then hopping back on a train and disappearing into the night. The Villisca crime, the authors argue, bears Mueller's hallmarks. They identified a pattern of common features across the murders. The families lived near railroad tracks. The killer struck after midnight, aiming to wipe out everyone in the house before dawn. He used the blunt back of an axe, often found at the scene belonging to the victims, to cave in their skulls. He covered the victims with blankets or clothing, and also covered windows and mirrors in the house. He left a kerosene lamp burning with the chimney off to provide dim light. And he always made his escape without leaving fingerprints, possibly by wearing gloves. The sheer consistency of these peculiar details across crimes in different states gives the Mueller theory a chilling credibility. In fact, legendary criminologist Harold Schechter praised the Jameses' book, calling their work the most probable solution yet to the Villisca mystery. If Mueller indeed was the man from the train, it would mean that the Villisca Axe Murder House was one stop along the bloody trail of one of America's first serial killers, a man responsible for at least 59 deaths across 14 separate incidents. Now to the paranormal. Over time, it passed through various owners and even renters, its outward appearance changing with the times. Porches were enclosed, modern plumbing and electricity were added, and the scars of the murder night were painted over or hidden by new furnishings. Yet the memory of what happened under its roof never fully faded. Locals would lower their voices when walking by, and some claimed that a pall of sadness hung around the property. For decades, the Villisca house was just an old residence with an infamous past, known to but a few historians and longtime residents. It wasn't until the 1990s that the Villisca Axe Murder House took on new life as a historic site and paranormal attraction. In 1994, a courageous and determined couple, Darwin and Martha Lynn, purchased the dilapidated old Moore home and decided to restore it to its 1912 condition. The murder house, as it came to be known, opened its doors to the public. What the Lynns perhaps didn't anticipate was that by preserving the past, they would also rekindle all the legends and lore attached to the house. Almost immediately, visitors to the Villisca Axe Murder House began reporting strange and eerie experiences. Over the last 20-plus years, this unassuming farmhouse has built a reputation as one of America's most haunted homes. Daytime tourists and overnight guests alike have walked out of the house with stories that send shivers down the spine. Many people describe an oppressive atmosphere inside, a sense of concentrated dread or overwhelming sadness that hits them in certain rooms for no apparent reason. Some have been suddenly overcome by feelings of anger or despair that vanish as soon as they step back outside. These subjective sensations might be dismissed as imagination, yet there are also tangible, unexplained phenomena reported with startling consistency. Visitors often hear disembodied sounds, the patter of footsteps in empty halls, thumps and bangs coming from upstairs when no one is up there, or the faint giggle of a child when the rooms are otherwise silent. On more than one occasion, people touring the house have sworn they saw objects move by themselves. A door creaking shut on its own, rocking chairs swaying with no one in them, or toys left in the children's bedroom rolling across the floor unassisted. Photographs taken inside sometimes reveal eerie anomalies, floating orbs of light, inexplicable mists, and shadowy figures that weren't visible in person. Paranormal investigators frequently visit and have collected what they believe is compelling evidence of ghostly activity. They document spikes in electromagnetic field, EMF detectors, and temperature drops in certain spots, and many have captured EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, ghostly voices or whispers imprinted on audio recordings when asking questions into the darkness. Some EVPs sound like the faint weeping of children, or a man's voice murmuring distant replies, as if the dead are still eager to tell their story. Among the most chilling reports are those involving apparent interactions with the spirits of the children who died in the house. In the downstairs bedroom where Lena and Ina Stillinger were killed, a room often dubbed the Blue Room or even the Dark Room by guides, some visitors have seen what they describe as a small, shadowy figure, or felt a tug on their clothes as if a child were nearby. On a few occasions, adult guests have watched in stunned disbelief as real, living children, brought on tours by their parents, began talking to empty air under the Stillinger bed, giggling and playing as though another child were hiding there. When asked who they're talking to, these young visitors sometimes matter-of-factly reply along the lines of the little boy or the little girl they see under the bed when no such child exists. It's enough to raise goosebumps even on hardened skeptics. Of all the unexplained phenomena, one recurring event has achieved near-legendary status, the 2 a.m. train. Villisca is a railroad town, and even today a freight train's whistle echoes through the town in the middle of the night. Many overnight guests have reported that shortly after the 2 a.m. train passes, the house seems to come alive with activity, as if the residual energy of the 1912 murders is reawakened by that lonesome whistle. Some paranormal researchers theorize that the killer might have timed the murders to the sound of the midnight train, to mask the noise of axe blows, or that the train's passing somehow triggers a replay of that trauma in the spirit world. Guests have described a strange fog or mist manifesting around 2 a.m., drifting from room to room along the exact path the murderer took. First the parents' bedroom, then the children's room, down the stairs to the guest room. This mist moves with purpose, as if tracing the steps of the killer. and then it vanishes as quickly as it appeared. People have also reported sudden bursts of activity at that hour. Lights seen flickering in the windows, even though the house has no electricity, doors found open that were closed before, or an unseen force jostling their bed as they try to sleep. The 2 a.m. train has become a signal to any overnight ghost hunter in Villisca. It's the moment when you hold your breath and listen, knowing that something uncanny might be about to happen. Not every encounter in the Axe Murder House is merely spooky sounds or glimpses either. There has been at least one instance of physical harm. In a famously harrowing incident on November 7, 2014, a paranormal enthusiast from Wisconsin was staying overnight in the house as part of a small investigation group when he inexplicably wound up with a knife plunged into his own chest. The man, 37-year-old Robert Lorson Jr., had brought a hunting knife with him, against the advice of the house's caretakers, and was hoping to provoke the spirits, perhaps to get a dramatic response. Sometime during the pre-dawn hours, other members of his group found him collapsed in a back room, bleeding from a stab wound. He was barely conscious, and his knife was slick with his own blood. Authorities later determined the injury was self-inflicted, essentially a bizarre accident, but to this day, Lorson himself cannot recall the moment it happened. The 2014 stabbing incident only amplified the house's haunted reputation. Even Johnny Hauser, the longtime caretaker and a self-described skeptic of ghosts, admitted that after that night he was hesitant to be alone in the house. After the stabbing, even I stopped doing overnight stays and started avoiding being there by myself, Hauser revealed, noting that the incident profoundly changed his view of the place. The Villisca Axe Murder House today stands as an unsettling intersection of historical tragedy and paranormal lore. By daylight, it is a museum frozen in the year 1912. The rooms are arranged just as they were on that fateful night. The small wooden bed frames, the modest furnishings, the family's personal belongings, all carefully placed to transport visitors back in time. The guided tours recount the known facts of the case, and one can see axe marks in the ceiling and feel the weight of sorrow within those walls. By night, the house welcomes intrepid souls who pay to spend the dark hours within, armed with flashlights and ghost-hunting gadgets. These overnight visitors have included professional paranormal teams and TV shows, as well as curious amateurs and ardent spiritualists. From Travel Channel's Ghost Adventures crew to countless YouTubers, many have tried to document evidence of the supernatural here. Some claim to have captured video of moving shadows or recorded voices of children pleading mama or no in the dead of night. Others have felt unseen hands touch them or have left the house with mysterious scratches on their skin. And of course, plenty of skeptics have spent the night and experienced nothing at all, except perhaps an understandable anxiety given the setting. Whether one believes in ghosts or not, nearly everyone agrees that the Villisca Axe Murder House evokes a profound reaction. It's not just another haunted attraction. It is the site of a real and horrific crime, its walls soaked in history and heartbreak. Indeed, the story of Villisca, part true crime saga, part ghost story, endures, reminding us that some secrets refuse to stay buried and perhaps some spirits never truly leave.